To the June Fireside Chat. Yeah, definitely not indoor fire weather, but we appreciate y'all being here when it's so nice outside. We hold these on the third Wednesday of the month and invite you to join NNRG, our partners and fellow forest stewards, to discuss forest management topics, share information and resources, and really connect with others who may face some of the same challenges and opportunities as you are in stewarding your forests. These are intended to be casual, so we usually spend about 30 minutes presentation and save some time for questions and discussion at the end. So feel free to drop questions in the chat. And then we're gonna, this will be our last fireside chat for the summer. So we are gonna take a couple months off as the weather gets nice and people are doing more outside. And we have more work going on in our forestry team in the summer. So we'll be back in September with the discussion around logging contracts. So between now and then, if there's things you're thinking about around that topic, definitely shoot me an email and we can try to include that. But for the June Fireside Chat, we are joined by Adrian Wolf, the Stewardship Manager for the Great Peninsula Conservancy. He joined them as a Stewardship Manager back in March of 21 and has over 25 years of professional experience working with threatened and endangered habitats and the species that depend on them. Adrian obtained his master's from Evergreen State College, where he focused on bird use of epiphytes in old growth coniferous forests. So a lot of extensive knowledge, research, and we really appreciate you joining us tonight to talk about some of the research you're doing now with the acoustic devices and looking at how birds are impacted by forest management. So thank you so much for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Laura. And yeah, thank you everybody for taking your time from just a wonderful afternoon where really you should be outside enjoying what we've been waiting for months now. But I'll try and make this as pleasant. How's that? Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. So yeah, I've been working with wildlife and forests for a number of years. Before I got back into the forest realm, I was working with a endangered species that lives on the prairies over here in the South Sound prairies, the streaked-horned lark. And I was just telling Laura how wonderful it is to walk through a prairie land, a grassland, being able to stand up straight and not have to duck under vegetation. And I do miss those days. But the forests are challenging, and there's some wonderful creatures that dwell there as well. Yeah, so what I'm going to talk about is really how the organization that I work with is doing work on the ground to improve habitat for these forest animals. And this first slide, I love this slide. And this is a quote by Richard Powers in his book Overstory. Dead logs are far more living than live ones, and that is really the case of our forests, of our old growth stands, where we have such great structural diversity, lots of coarse woody debris on the forest floor, and many of our preserves, and I'll get into this, and many of the forest stands that we have in our region really don't have these features anymore. So yeah, this is, and these, something like this nurse log that's laying on the ground. I understand that a cedar tree that's been standing for 500 years will actually lay down on the ground for nearly twice as long as that, as it decays and rots and provides habitat for for a bunch of other plant life at other trophic levels, including fungi, nematodes, beetles, amphipods, amphibians, all kinds of things. I'm speaking to the crowd, the choir. You guys probably all know about this. So yeah, just a little bit about GPC, Great Peninsula Conservancy. We're a local land trust, and I've been here for about 3 years, going into my 4th year. And really our mission is to protect and improve the most ecologically valuable lands for both wildlife use as well as human enjoyment. And, we recognize that these, the tribes that we're the first stewards of these lands, and we continue to partner with them. And our partnerships with them, with the tribes, are so critical for the success of our mission. That includes the Suquamish, Port Gamble, Sklallam, the Skokomish, Squaxin Island, Nisqually, and the Puyallup tribes. Just a little bit more about GPC. So our working region is we work in 3 different counties. In the entirety of Kitsap County, the northeastern portion of Mason County, and then the western portion of Pierce County. We're slowly starting to get on the west side of Hood Canal now, but most of our conservation lands are in east of the Hood Canal. In that highlighted area in green is our working region. And we have about 348,000 residents that live in this region, and we maintain our founding principle of being a community-led organization, and by sustaining these strong partnerships with tribes, with other nonprofits, and also engaging with our nearly 1,000 members. To date, we've preserved over 11,000 acres, and these are also lands that we've assisted with. Our conservation group that helps with acquisition, they are very busy identifying the most important conservation lands for protection. And yeah, we have over 5,000 acres of forest lands. We've protected over 200 acres of estuary and tidelands, and over 10 miles of shoreline, and then also the riparian components. And all of these are important for the bird community. We have a diverse, abundant bird community in this region because of the diversity of habitats that we have here. Yeah, so if anybody has been paying attention to what is going on in the bird world, these birds are having a tough time, and not just in North America, but across the globe. They're suffering huge declines, and these declines are confounded. They're complex. Sometimes they're straightforward. It's just habitat loss and habitat degradation, but there's also less subtle things like toxins and disease that are really impacting our birds. Our western forests are also showing declines, particularly where our forests are stressed. And as I'm sure you've learned from other NNRG presentations, these stressed forests are often a result of mismanagement, and simplifying these forest stands and suppressing fire, and not allowing these forest stands to mature into complex, structurally diverse habitats. This slide right here was taken from the State of the Birds report for Western forest birds, and they assessed about 46 species. And the 30-year trend is the same as it was about 50 years ago. It's kind of stable, but there's been, for the last 20 years or since 1990, there's been about a 20% decline. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, please put your hand up or send some questions in the chat, and I'm happy to stop at any time and field questions. I tend to go on and not stop unless I'm prompted.
All right, good night, Ron. Yep, you too.
Okay, so on a more optimistic note, our lowland and coastal forest birds are showing actually some stable and in fact slightly increasing trends. However, the species in our higher elevations and east of the Cascades is what's driving these declines, and this does appear to be strongly related to habitat needs. Yeah, so this is another figure from the State of the Birds report, and if you want to go and find this report, it's a couple of years old, but it's still pretty consistent of really what the trends are showing. Yeah, the figure on the left shows declining bird trends in the brownish hues, and increases in the blue-green. And so as you can see, our lowland forests in the Puget Sound region where we work is actually showing some, some stable, actually some increasing trends. And I think that is a result of the very important restoration work that's going on, really good forest management practices, and great organizations like NNRG who are helping forest landowners better manage their forest stands. The figure on the right, this one right here, this illustrates the need for restoring disturbance regimes. And I worked for years in the prairies, and that disturbance regime there was fire. And what we did to really to modify that habitat type is just to get rid of fire, which was so important for revitalizing that understory and that early successional habitat, which this endangered species that I was working with, the street-horned lark, it depended on. Without fire, after about 10 years, this bird just cannot find suitable habitat. So frequent fire intervals was important. And that's the case in the east side of the mountains as well, where you have these frequent return intervals that keep, that are slow burning, and maintain that ponderosa pine habitat. West of the mountains, there's less need of disturbance restoration. And I think this is a little misleading. Some of that is due to, because some of it is developed. But still, we're missing those disturbance regimes. We're missing the fires. We're missing the, it's a little different on the west side where we have these stand replacing fires. But in the Willamette Valley of Oregon, flooding and the flooding of the Columbia River, that created those disturbance regimes for those early successional habitats. So it's hard to think long-term, and planning out 100, 200 years to try and get these, these infrequent disturbance regimes back on our landscape. But that's so critical, and these birds really depend on that. Yeah, and just to talk about, some of the birds that we have here, it's not just these, our year-round residents that we need to prepare and maintain habitat for, but it's also recognizing how the Pacific Northwest plays a critical role in the movement of animals up and down the coast as they make their migratory journey between their breeding grounds and their wintering grounds. The Pacific Oceanic route and the Pacific Coastal route, there's a plethora of animals that follow that line all the way up to the Arctic to go breed. And if they don't have suitable stopover sites to refuel, that's going to really impact their longevity and their livelihood. So this is atypical of what we have on our conservation lands. Rarely do we have these 500-year-old Sitka spruce and western red cedar. This is our preserve, our Grover's Creek Preserve, just outside of Kingston, and we manage this preserve for wildlife. And it's my job as stewardship manager to make sure that these habitat values, these conservation values, are being maintained. And so what we do, go in there, and at a minimum, we're required to go and monitor our preserves at least once a year, just to make sure that those values are being maintained. But I don't feel that's enough. I feel that, coming from with an ornithological background, I feel that there's some metrics that we could put in place to better understand whether we're achieving our ecological objectives. And that's, bringing birds into this play, and I'll get into how we are doing this and what mechanisms we're using in order to have birds tell us that story. So this this is our target community, you know, in our forest lands where we have lowland forests, you know, you see these big old trees, lots of coarse woody debris on the ground. You have suppressed and intermediate trees and a diverse understory of fruit-bearing shrubs. And all those resources, you know, results in niche partitioning with these animals that depend on these different resources. They're rich. Yeah, and then also these logs and these snags, you know, Kirk Hansen always tells me to embrace death, and I think that's great, you know, embrace decadence. And really these features are lacking on our preserves. And what these animals that some of the examples of these animals that depend on these resources are cavity dependent species. You know, we have our chickadees, we have our woodpeckers. All of these, just a note, all of these photographs with birds in the hand are taken. I run a bird banding station, a map station down in Thurston County, and we operate nests about 7 days out of the year from during the breeding season. And we put little rings, you know, numbered rings on their legs, and it's a way to understand productivity and survivorship. And so all of these photographs are taken from that bird banding station. The station is a riparian habitat dominated by Gary oak and Oregon ash with a very dense understory. So a lot of the species that we see in this complex habitat along the Black River also occur in our, you know, our target communities in the lowland coniferous forests because of that structural diversity. So yeah, we're working to put conservation practices on the ground to increase resources and those features that these cavity dependent species depend on. Something else that's lacking in our forests are these well-developed understories. And in an old-growth stand, you will have lots of fallen logs. You will have gaps in the canopy that can reinitiate the understory. And many of our timberlands that have been managed for timber production don't really have that component anymore. I was going to let people see if they know the names of these animals. Bottom left, that's a warbling vireo, and you hardly ever see that animal, but it's a low understory herbivore, insectivore. They'll hang out in these dense understory vegetation. Hardly ever see it, but there's a great mnemonic for this species, and it's "I'll see you, I'll seize you, and I'll squeeze you till you pop." So listen to the song and use that mnemonic, and you'll never forget that mnemonic. Okay. Anybody know this animal over here? It's not your typical. This is a juvenile Wilson's warbler. And in fact, when the males hatch, they do have a little black cap on their heads. The males, the old adult males, will have a full black cap, but when they hatch out, you can sex them readily. And this animal in the top right, everybody knows, is the rufous hummingbird. This is a male. And all of these three species depend on these dense, you know, diverse understory vegetation that offer fruit, that offer insects, that offer nectar. And this is something that we're trying to reintroduce into some of our, you know, heavily managed timberlands that we've that our conservation group has acquired for me. I really do all the work. Acquiring the lands is easy. Restoring these habitats is really difficult. So just to continue talking about some of these representatives, these birds that occur in these different habitats that we're managing for. This is our Hansville Greenway Knudsen Preserve that we just acquired this year, and it's got a lovely wetland complex in Lower Hawks Pond, if you've ever been up in North Kitsap County. So some of the animals you'll find there are yellow warblers. The mnemonic there is sweet, sweet little sweet. And this is a pair of black-headed grosbeak. The male is on the left-hand side, the female is on the right-hand side. So yeah, these commonly found in these wetland and riparian habitats with, again, with structurally diverse canopy as well as understory. Excuse me. So, you know, when I was thinking about how to approach our restoration activities on our conservation lands, there's numerous resources out there. There's this fantastic publication here by the Forest Steward Guild called Forestry for the Birds. This one is for Western Oregon. Like they're building one for Washington right now. But this one is still pretty applicable. The crossover of species, you know, we don't get hermit warblers and things like that. But most of the species that are in our region, this book is applicable. And stay tuned. I've received a pre-press version of the Washington plan, and it's very similar. So yeah, these resources are there. And there's also other resources, you know, how to improve. There's many things that we can do. We shouldn't only rely on conservation lands that, you know, land trusts and national forests and the county sets aside for conservation. You can do things in your backyard. You can plant things, you can plant trees, you can plant a plethora of shrubs that are so good for our feathered friends. And this is a publication by Laura Erickson on how to feed the birds at home. So the Forestry for the Birds, this is a page out of the booklet. And so I'll just show you what it looks like, you know. So on the right-hand side, the Swainson's thrush, it talks a little bit about its natural history, and a little bit about what the animal does, where you might find it, and then also what you can do to foster the habitat for that animal. Really, really wonderful resource. And then, you know, useful symbols to describe how they feed, what they're feeding on, the type of structures that they need, such as a mature conifer, as well as what their nests might look like and what those resources might be. And then, you know, it tells you if it's a local or a migrant animal as well. So I highly recommend using this resource if you have forest lands at home. Even if you don't, even if you have a vegetable garden and you can plant the sides with some native shrubs that are fruit bearing, you would be helping these animals. Another great resource is this from the Washington Native Plant Society. And, you know, it lists on the left-hand side, these are the both tree as well as shrub species. And on the columns are animals, the birds that depend or will use those. Another great resource. And I could throw this in the chat, but I'm not that sophisticated. So, but
I can do it for you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so for example, if you wanted to bring bush tits into your yard, you could plant some willows. Similarly, if you want grosbeaks, if you plant willows, they will utilize those resources. So this is a really useful resource. Okay, shifting to what many of our conservation lands look like. You know, this is a legacy for how we've treated our land, and this is a function of historical land management activities to maximize timber production. The image on the right-hand side is a piece of property that is about 487 acres that we're about to acquire, or we're working on acquiring, and that has its own challenges. You know, eventually this should be a mature forested landscape, but the reason I kept this here is these successional habitats. This is part, there's no real climax community with the forest stands. It's always in flux. So it shouldn't look like this per se. You shouldn't have 487 acres of Scotch broom, but smaller openings, gaps. These are features on the landscape that do increase the species diversity for not just birds, but other trophic levels as well. This is our Grover's Creek Preserve. This is a forest stand that NNRG helped us manage, and NNRG is a wonderful partner. They help us implement and plan and design our ecological forestry practices with the ultimate goal of improving climate resiliency and ultimately, to improve habitat for the wildlife that depend on these healthy forests. This particular stand is typical of many stands in our working region. It's overstocked. It's a monoculture of Douglas fir. You can see the understory is almost entirely lacking. And with funding from the NRCS, this is the Natural Resource Conservation Service, as well as Cornell, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, we've worked with NNRG to design these conservation practices. And here, what we did here is we thinned the stand from about 500 trees per acre to about 140 trees per acre. And we just did this a couple of years ago. We're monitoring. We've seen some understory vegetation coming up, but still, it's a long ways to go. And I think we could add more light to the forest floor here still as well to help our bird species. This is a slide that NNRG helped us thin the stand on the right-hand side here. That is that stand, the previous photograph, the interior. This is a drone image of that. And you can see what the previous, prior to the thinning activity, really a closed canopy forest with very little light hitting the forest floor. This treatment over here, this is a gap cut. And the intent there is to mimic a tree fall, a wind event. And we put about 6 of these gap cuts on the ground to enhance the bird community, to reinitiate that understory, to produce more fruit-bearing and nectar-bearing vegetation. That is really, as you saw with the previous slide, there was almost nothing on the ground. So yeah, if you have forest lands, there are programs that are available for to support you with your work. They're cost share programs. This particular one through USDA is the Stewardship Conservation Program, a Conservation Stewardship Program. And Kit Ellis in the crowd here, she has implemented some of this work on her land, on her forest. So it is available. There's a big pot of money, and they will help develop prescriptions for you to meet your ecological objectives. So we did. We received a 5-year cost share funding from NRCS for doing this work. And this is one of the patch cuts. This particular patch cut, we used equipment. This is a feller buncher, and we worked with NNRG for them to help us with our FPA, our forest practices application. And I took this opportunity to put bird monitoring devices out there before we did this work, so we could track how the birds respond to these ecological practices. And I'll go into the details of what those devices look like. But I just wanted to talk about one more forest practice that we put on the ground to try and create more habitat for wildlife. And this is the creating snags, creating standing snags, and creating habitat piles and constructed logs. And this was also funded, partially funded through the cost share program, the CSP cost share program. And this is my former colleague, Ben, and you can see how tree girdling is the way to create a standing snag. And basically the only part that's alive under the bark is the cambium, the phloem, and the xylem. And if you sever that around the bole of the tree, and if the tree remains standing, hopefully, that tree will eventually die, rot out, hollow out, and these cavity-dependent species will either excavate cavities or, and then secondary nesting cavity species will move in as well. So that's just a way to move those habitats that have been simplified along to more structurally diverse habitats. And we were also building these habitat piles, and these are surrogates. These are proxies for, big fallen trees, like a root wad or something that's going to persist on the landscape for a number of years, and it's going to rot out and provide habitat and refugia for wildlife to move in. And then this, it's a little bit hard to see, but we've laid down a tree right here, and then we bundle the tree together. It's about 20 feet long. It's about 20 inches in diameter. And this is supposed to mimic a fallen log in an older stand. But because we have such young forests now, we're trying to recreate that feature on the landscape. This feature measures about 10 by 10 by 6 feet tall. So yeah, we've been pretty busy. Just for the tree girdling efforts, we've put about 817 features on a landscape across, I think it's about 7 or 8 preserves. And you can see how the size class, so the species on the left-hand side, Acer is bigleaf maple, Ulmus rubra is red alder. Because of our young stands, these early successional hardwood dominated stands, that's really what comprises most of our forest lands. And that's what's representing the skewed numbers in those top 2 species for numbers of trees that we've girdled. It's just a function of what's on the landscape. And then again, also the size class, this is diameter at breast height. We've girdled mostly trees in the 6 to 10 inch class range. There's not that many trees in the greater than 20 inch size class that are there, which reflects how we've selected our trees. But yeah, this is my colleague Michaela. We use chainsaws to do 2 parallel cuts, and then we'll use a chisel and a hammer. And hopefully this will work. Let's see if this works. Yeah. So once we do the parallel cuts with the chisel and hammer, you're basically going to peel that bark back. It's quite satisfying. And we do thank the trees afterwards. Yep. So now we have a couple UW capstone students that are joining us this year who are going to help us test the efficacy of this work. And they're going to be running around taking a subsample to see whether the trees that we've girdled have actually died. It's going to take years for some of these trees to die, to rot out. And the tool that we're using to assess the birds can be repeated, in 10, 30, 50 years from now. So it's a reliable effort. And I'll get to that. Again, this is one of the habitat piles. So yeah, this is our work effort, what we've done across our working region. From the tip of the Key Peninsula at our Johnson South Sound Preserve, we've treated 100 acres at Grover's Creek, and as little as 9 acres at Bear Creek. This is for the snags and coarse woody debris. I'm not going to get into the reforestation because I want to focus on the forests, the habitat structures that we're creating here. But I just wanted to show you how we've done this across our working region. And so for a subset of those areas where we've treated, we received funding from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, their land conservation, their landbird conservation initiative. I'm messing that one up. Land Trust Bird Conservation Initiative, that's what it is. And they funded us to test this novel equipment and see whether this can actually, it's a feasibility study to see if this is actually going to work. Here are our project sites where we did the work. This is our Grover's Creek, Eglon Beebe up in the north here, Johnson South Sound at the bottom, and then Burley Creek. This is along the 16 if you're driving up towards Bremerton. And yeah, this is what the landscape looks like. These circles right here are our bird plots. This is where we put in our little acoustic monitoring devices that the next slide will show you what those look like. And we install them before the work and then after the work. And we can do this, again, 10, 20 years from now to see whether we're achieving our ecological objectives, and those birds that rely on those habitats that we're shooting for, whether they're going to be there or not. These are what the devices look like. It's basically just a data logger, and they have these waterproof cases, and you put a little SD card in them, and you can deploy them out there in the field. The software, they're called audio moth devices. They're about $70 to $80. When there was a chip shortage, the prices bumped up quite a bit, and we had to wait for a few months before we actually got any shipped. But you can see Ben holding the device right here with the case. They're small. They can be mounted to the tree. We've never had anything stolen. And then you can program them to record different periods of the day. So if you're interested in the early morning song, from 5:30 to 9:30, it's a 4-hour stretch. And then we were also interested in our nocturnal species. So we also deployed, or we programmed them to record some evening songs as well. And yeah, this is what they look like on the ground. So they have a little Velcro strap and attached to the tree. And we found that we can leave them out there for about 2 weeks, depending on how much information and how much data you're collecting over the period of time. And again, these are acoustic monitoring devices. We're catching bird songs. And so once that data comes in, there's a software called Arbamon, and we download all the information in here. And so you can see for Johnson South Sound, there's 1,200 recordings. And boy, how do you sit through 1,000 recordings? Well, this software is unbelievable. What you can do, each of those recordings you can bring into a sonogram right here. So this little signature right here, and this little signature right here, just by looking at it, I've been looking at these sonograms for years now, and I can tell that one right there, that is a Swainson's thrush. And the one with the little the upslur is used to be called a Pacific slope flycatcher. Now it's called a Western flycatcher. But yeah, this is what the sonograms do. Is you can just look at these recordings, but who wants to go through 1,200 of these recordings, right? That's just for the one site. Now, that was an old slide of the sites. Now we have over 100,000 recordings from all of our project sites. So what you can do is you can tell the software, hey, this right here is a Swainson's thrush. And then you tell the software, sort through all of these other files and tell me which sites at what times, and you can ask the AI to basically mine that information for you. It's a wonderful program. If anybody wants to help us mine it, we're looking for volunteers. And really, it'll pump out a series of graphs, and really the effort is to look at each one of those. Sometimes you could just look at them and validate, say, yes, this is a Swainson's thrush. But other times you actually have to play the song. And I think I can play, let's see if you can hear this. Oh, it's not going to let me do it. No, it's not going to let me do it. But you can play some of these songs back. So yeah, that's what we're doing, and we can use this information from each of our project sites, and let's say in our patch cut units where if we don't get a Swainson's thrush there, well, maybe we need to create a bigger patch cut. So that helps us drive our management and inform more of our management work, so we could best serve these animals that are, that need those structurally diverse habitats. I'm going on, and I know I went over my half an hour. My last slide is just, there's some wonderful resources out there. If anybody's hasn't heard of Merlin, this is an app that you can download, and you can let your phone listen to birds singing, and it'll tell you what those birds are. It's pretty good. It's not 100%, but it's a wonderful thing to be introduced into what's around you out there. That's it. That's all I had to say. Geez, all I had to say. Happy to take
very
questions.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, if people want to throw your hand up or just unmute, and you can also use the chat to ask questions. Change my view so I can see you. Any questions from the group? Dave, did you have one? I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, this is Dave Galvin.
Yes, I'm not hearing nearly as many.
Okay.
Can't tell who's going. How about
Now, am I?
Who's speaking?
all right? I'm going to try to call on people because I feel like we have a few. I'm going to start with Dave Galvin, and then I'll call on the people I see that are unmuted.
Yes, this is Dave. I'm from Snoqualmie Pass in Washington State. And my question is, how successful has girdling been to create more snags versus also putting up temporary or long-term bird houses for the various species that we're trying to get back into our forest up in the mountains?
That's a great question, Dave. We have some preliminary information about tree girdle failure. Some of our trees have fallen over, which is not what we want. So I mentioned the UW capstone students that have just started with us. They're going to be going out, and they're going to be collecting a sample of tree girdled trees across our region. And we have a series of metrics, and we're going to be assessing whether they're still standing, whether they've died, whether they, how deep the cuts were, was the bark peeled, things like that. And these capstone students are going to write a report at the end of their 10-week. They just started this week. And NNRG, the Jarl man, is very interested in finding out, how successful these things are. Again, we just put these things on the ground. We don't monitor them. And so we're taking this opportunity to send some folks out there to assess. And we're doing the same thing with the coarse woody debris features as well. There's evidence that some of these habitat piles have just collapsed and disappeared over a couple of years. And so we're looking at, the composition of the habitat piles were conifers used, or were they all hardwoods? So hardwoods disappearing quicker than conifers, so we can inform our next activities.
Thank you. Drew and Helen, did you have a question? I see you're unmuted.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can.
See, I don't know. Oh, you can.
We
Okay,
can. Yep.
Swainson thrush. Yeah, the Swainson thrush is one of my favorite summer bird songs. And they used to come into Kitsap County around May 15th every year. And they're showing up later and later and fewer. Could you explain why?
I could try. There's a lot of factors that are influencing, changes in phenology and when these birds arrive and when they don't. The Swainson's thrush winters in the Amazonian jungle, and we don't really know what's triggering them. Why do they leave at a certain time? There's a push on that side, and there's also a pull on this side. Sometimes it has to do with food resource availability. I'm surprised that you say that they're arriving later, because what we're finding is actually that these animals are arriving a little bit earlier on their breeding grounds. It's possible that habitat has changed. I have noticed that the Swainson's thrush that's normally outside of our house is not here this year. These animals are also extremely sight tenacious. We've banded a couple Swainson's thrush at our banding station in Thurston County, and this animal we caught every year for 6 years. It flew 5,000 miles to the same copse of trees for 6 years in a row. And if that animal, if its wintering grounds are disturbed, my guess is it's going to have to find another, wintering habitat down there. So it's confounded. It's complicated. I don't know how to answer that question other than there's a lot of stresses on our birds, and also climate change. The insect hatch is not timing well with some of our migrants that are arriving here at certain times. So that's another stress.
All right. I'm going to go to Peter, followed by Carl and Lorna.
Great. Thank you. Adrian, this was a terrific presentation. So thank you. And you and I met and visited at the Northwest Innovative Forestry Summit about 2 years ago when you're getting started on a lot of this. And it's super exciting to see how it's progressed. So a couple of questions. One is, are there specific questions you're trying to answer with the audio monitoring? And if so, what are they? And if you envision this work progressing in the next 1, 3, 5 years, where would you hope it will go in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Yeah, good to see you again. I do remember you. The initial question when we were funded by Cornell is we operated these devices at the same time where we also conducted traditional bird monitoring counts, so point counts as well as area searches. And we're looking at, and I'm still doing this, looking at how effective these acoustic monitoring devices are relative to these traditional methods. So that is one of the questions. And really it is just to see, we have about 20 target species that we've identified that are most likely to respond positively to these conservation practices. And I can send you that list. Some of those photographs that I showed you, the Wilson's warbler, the Swainson's thrush, numerous woodpeckers, those are our target species, and we're focusing the Arbormon analysis on those animals to see whether they're going to respond. So that's, we have a suite of 20 species that we're focusing on. And then for long term, the tree snag work, we're going to run another set of monitoring this coming July. Cornell gave us another round of funding. We've also collaborated with another land trust. We've got them going with a similar acoustic monitoring program, and now we're getting Bainbridge Island Land Trust on board as well. And so they're very excited to learn about this. Remote monitoring is becoming very prevalent in wildlife management. We are right now looking at the changes in the patch cuts, because those are more readily, huge changes when you reduce the canopy cover to just a couple of trees per acre. And we're waiting for that understory vegetation to reinitiate. That's what we're going to be focusing our next analysis, and putting those moths out in those new stands. I hope I answered your question.
Got the thumbs up. Carl and Lorna.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the great lecture. What we live on 125 acres, and we've really appreciated Merlin. We've identified around 50 diverse species. But one thing, and most of our land is in a valley, but most of it's timber and multiple mix. But what's interesting, I mow some of the fields a little bit, left over from when we used to have farm animals and stuff. But the ravens fly so very high, but they seem to come out when I'm mowing, because they're looking probably for snakes and rodents and stuff. But I wonder why they fly so high. Now we also have, red-tailed hawks, and and then bald eagles and all those, but and vultures even, but they never seem to fly so high as ravens. And also I was wondering about how a person could get one of those bird acoustic monitors, or are they kind of, you said they're like $70 or $80, are they outrageous now? Or anyway, those two questions.
Why a raven flies so high? I don't know, because they have a bird brain. I don't know. Because they can. If I could fly, I would also go really high. No, you should read some of John Marslough's work about ravens, and he's a professor at UW, who's studied them extensively.
Is it John Lark?
Marslough. It's MARZLUFF, I think. Marslough, yeah, or OFF.
Okay.
Okay. Regarding mowing, yes, what you're doing is you're opening up that landscape for wildlife to find prey easier. When we mowed the prairies to prepare for planting, we would have swallows following the tractors. They would pick up all the insects that would be scattered. So yes, that is a disturbance that that animals will love. You're basically exposing the prey. And in terms of the audio moths, you can go to if you look up audio moth online, you buy them from Germany, and we just bought another batch. I think they were still about $79 to $80. And then the case is about $30 to $40. But the learning curve to analyze the information in Arbamon, which is a free software, it's steep. But happy to teach you if you're willing to learn.
Nice offer.
Oh yeah, well, thanks.
All right, I'm gonna hop over.
Well, I guess.
Did you have another question?
Well, one thing I guess I was thinking about, ravens can coexist with, in cities and that kind of thing, and they seem to be, get along with people. So that's part of my surprise, I guess, why they fly so very high. But I think when they live out in this secluded area, they don't see us as an asset, probably. So. Thanks.
Thanks,
Sure.
Lorna. All right, I just in the chat we have from Scott, what time of year do bald eagles kick their young out of the nest? We've been seeing a lot of activity in the last couple of days with a lot of vocalizations? Do you know?
That's a good question. I'm no eagle specialist. There's a great, if you go to All About Birds, which is again, it's a Cornell clearinghouse of information. If you put bald eagle in that as in their search engine, you can sort through a bunch of information about the animals, their natural history, you know, when they arrive, if they're migrants, things like that. Specifics like that when I believe that they're pretty early nesting birds. You know, most of our residents do start initiating nests around January, February. I just saw a couple of chickadee young moving around already. I mean, this is not that young. It's not that early in the breeding season. But yeah, go to All About Birds. If you ask me about the street-horned lark, I can tell you everything you need to know about that bird.
Yeah, I thought it was a little later later in summer, but I'm not quite sure around this area. So someone finds out, definitely let us know. Next question in here. What impact did the bird flu have on local populations over the last 2 years? They've seen fewer seabirds on the water of Liberty Bay.
Yeah, that's a group of animals that have been really impacted for the terns. I think they lost an entire tern colony on the Columbia River. We haven't seen that at our bird banding station. We've been running this for about 11 years. A couple years ago, we saw a really steep decline in captures for both adults as well as juveniles. Whether that's associated with flu, I'm not quite sure. We weren't pulling feathers. We weren't contributing information to that data set. But there is, for some reason, the seabirds are getting hammered a little bit more than some of our landbirds, and I'm not quite sure what that mechanism is and why they're so why they're so more susceptible.
Thanks. We have one more comment regarding an earlier question. I'll read from the chat, and then we're getting up on our time. So Swainson's thrushes are one of the top 10 species in Washington state by total numbers. They populate all the Cascades and beyond, so local changes might not reflect statewide distributions. Dave.
Yeah, we were wondering whether to include that as one of our indicator species, but they do use dense understory vegetation, and that is one of the things that's lacking in many of our stands. So that image that I showed you of that overstocked stand, there's no Swainson's thrush in there. We've never detected an animal there. But once we open up that canopy a little bit and we girdle some more trees, more light reaches the forest floor, we expect, you know, a understory species like that to occupy that stand. And if it doesn't, and if we don't get that suite of species, those target species that we've identified, then it indicates to us that we need to do more work. We need to improve that understory vegetation. But you're right, it's a pretty common bird. It's our second most captured bird at our banding station. Yeah, wonderful animal to work with. And that ethereal song is just unparalleled.
Nice. Well, Adrian, thank you so much for your time tonight. It's a really cool project, and I look forward to kind of following where it goes with more time. And I know you shared a lot of resources tonight, so I will we'll post this video on YouTube, and I'll add some of those resources there. And I could put a link to that on our NNRG's event page if you have trouble finding our YouTube. So thanks again, everyone. And a reminder, if you didn't hear me at the beginning, we will take the next 2 months off so people get out, enjoy the summer and the nice weather. We'll be back with Fireside Chats in September, and Kirk and Jal and probably a guest are going to talk about logging contracts. So like if you have any specific questions around that topic between now and September, let us know so we can build that into it. And yeah, enjoy what's left of the daylight. And we appreciate you all coming. Thanks again, Adrian.
Thank you for your time, everybody. Go birds.
Yeah.